All right, everyone. I think there may be some other folks coming soon, but I wanted to have a chance for everyone who has to leave at the end of the hour to have a chance to hear our presenters and have your questions ready, because the nature of historical roots of our time talk is that everyone gets involved. So we want to make sure that the audience is ready to respond and kind of get engage with these really interesting questions and issues that our two speakers are going to bring up today. So today we have Dr. Christopher Davis from here at UNCG in the Office of Sponsored Programs, and also a researcher and a PhD graduate from our Department of History, and Zachary Moore, a graduate of UNCG and of our MA program, and managing editor. Zach, I want to make sure I have your title correct.
Deputy managing editor.
Deputy managing editor at the Americas at ICIS. Today, Chris and Zach are speaking on Haiti in Crisis, Roots of the Current Upheaval and Historical Complexity of Intervention. And I'll turn it over to our speakers to have their short introduction.
All right. Well, Zach, I believe you start us off with, in talking about Haiti, we start in Venezuela. And hopefully by the end of this, you'll all understand why the story starts there. But I will go ahead and start sharing the slides. And let's see. Everybody seeing that okay? Everybody able to see that okay?
Mm-hmm.
All right. All right. Off to you, Zach.
Sure. So I'll start off a little bit. So just a quick introduction about myself. As Dr. Anderson mentioned, I am a graduate of the UNCG MA program in history. I've since gone to work for ICIS, which is a consulting firm in the energy and petrochemical space. So since we were going to talk a little bit about Venezuelan oil diplomacy, Dr. Davis decided to kind of bring me in, since I have some experience in the industry in addition to my history background. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of the Venezuelan oil industry during the period that we're covering. And just to begin the discussion, you may have heard in discussions of crude oil that the light crude or heavy crude, or the sweet crude versus the sour crude. So crude oil is classified as either light or heavy based on its API gravity. That's API is the American Petroleum Institute. They have a measurement of density. So, just know that that's where that comes from. The main point as far as the market is concerned is that a light crude is easier to process than a heavier crude. As you can see from this graph, it shows what kind of fractions you get out of crude. Crude is distilled by fractional distillation. So they heat the crude up, and as various fractions of it come off, basically the lighter ends come off first, and then the very heavy stuff doesn't come off until they get the temperature under the crude up to over 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. So the more stuff there is at the heavier end at the bottom of the barrel, the more energy it takes to actually process the crude. Also, as you can see on that graph, the more valuable parts of the barrel, the gasoline, the diesel, the jet fuel, tend to be in the lighter to middle ends of the barrel rather than at the bottom of the barrel. So the lighter end is both easier to process, and it has more of the valuable products in it. As far as sweet or sour is concerned, it's all about sulfur content. So if the sulfur content of your crude is 0.7% or less, it is sweet. 0.7% or greater, it is sour. Refineries really do not like sulfur. So there's a lot of processes in a refinery that are designed to destroy sulfur, to remove it from the fuels and other products that the refinery is running. So again, the market will prize a sweet crude more than a sour crude, because again, there's more processing involved in a sour crude. I mention all this because the Venezuelan crude, the Orinoco blends, are some of the heaviest and the sourest crudes on the planet. So Venezuelan crude, in addition to the subsidies that the Chavez government was giving for it, even on the market, it would trade at a pretty significant discount relative to benchmark crude grades. We can go ahead to the next slide. And this is just a graph showing the kind of price differentials that'll exist between, again, a sweet and light versus a heavy and sour grade. I've taken two domestic grades. The red line up there is Louisiana light sweet, which, as you can imagine, is a light sweet grade. The green line there is Southern Green Canyon, which is a domestic heavy sour grade from the Gulf of Mexico. And just as you can see on the line, that light sweet grade carries a pretty steady premium over time relative to the heavy sour grades. Most of the physical grades of crude will trade at a differential to the benchmark. So if you ever hear crude settled $2 higher, they're usually referring to either the Brent or WTI, which are the two benchmark grades. All the physical grades will trade either at a premium or a discount to those benchmark grades. And again, with the heavy sour grades, it'll be at a discount. Southern Green Canyon will be relatively small discount. Again, the Venezuelan crude is much heavier, much sour than Southern Green Canyon. So a steeper discount would be in place for that. We can go ahead to the next slide. And this is just a general history of the oil price between 2005 and 2019, which was basically the duration of the Petro-Carib program. The average price for WTI, which is the US benchmark, was $73 a barrel over this period. We had the price peaked at over $147 a barrel. That was in the summer of 2008. That was just before the financial crisis occurred with the housing market meltdown. And as you can see from there, there was a very steep drop. Crude fell at one point to as low as about $25 or $30 a barrel, rebounded between like 2010, 2012 up to about around $100 a barrel. But then after 2014, dropped out of that $100 barrel range and stayed kind of in maybe the $50 to $70 per barrel threshold. And, you know, believed at the time, a lot of oil analysts, including many people at our company, we were doubtful that we would ever see $100 barrel crude again. Now, obviously, we were wrong. We did hit that marker again, but hey, you know, forecasting economics is difficult. What can we say? So, anyway, next slide. This slide looks at what's known as the fiscal break-even point. So with Venezuela, as with a lot of countries that are heavily dependent on oil revenue for their state budgets, they calculate basically what the price per barrel of crude needs to be for these countries to balance their budget. This is 2017 data, so it is, you know, appropriate for the period in question. The average crude price was about $52 a barrel at that time, whereas for Venezuela to balance their budget, they needed crude to average about $118 a barrel. So there was a very significant shortfall between the money that they needed to cover their budget, the promises that they made both domestically and internationally, as opposed to the money that they were actually bringing in. So of course, remember, for these 2017 figures, a lot of that was based on that period, 2007, 2008. Oil prices were over $100 a barrel, rising. A lot of people were thinking at the time we would hit 150, we might hit $200 a barrel. So a lot of these countries were baking in that oil prices would be high and stay high. That didn't happen at the end of the day, but a lot of times what happens is these government budgets are not able to move as quickly as the oil markets do. So Venezuela was stuck in that case with a very, very large deficit, just because what they had promised and what they could actually deliver, there was a very large shortfall between them. You can go on to the next slide. And this is looking at the general history of the Venezuelan oil industry over this period. The blue line is its overall refining capacity, which stayed pretty steady. The orange line is the actual refinery throughput. That's actually the amount of crude that's actually run through a refinery. And then that sloping line is essentially the average refinery utilization. So refinery utilization in Venezuela started pretty normally, kind of in the 70s, 80s, low 90s. And then especially after 2014, 2015, when oil prices fell below 100 and stayed below 100, just fell off very, very quickly, down to only about 25% utilization by 2019. So very, very low utilization. Obviously, that the result of that, you know, part of the problem was that the country was spending a lot of its oil money both to cover domestic promises as well as its international promises to its international partners such as Haiti. And because of that, it was starving its oil industry of needed funds for reinvestment. And we saw that in declining rates in the refineries, and the loss of petrochemical production. There used to be petrochemical production in Venezuela. Now it's basically zero beyond what little is coming out of the refineries. And then by 2019, Venezuela was still exporting oil, but the refinery run rates in that country were so low that it had to become an importer of gasoline. So 2005, the beginning of this period, Venezuela was exporting about 3 million tons of gasoline every year. By 2019, it had to import about 500,000 tons of gasoline to cover its domestic demand. And this was at a time when, because of the economic crisis in Venezuela, domestic demand for gasoline had fallen quite a lot. So if they'd still been consuming gasoline at 2005 levels, they would have had to import much, much more, which just shows again how steeply the country's oil industry fell off over this time period. Next slide. The current state of Venezuela's oil sector. So Venezuela currently produces about 600,000 barrels per day of crude oil. That is down from a peak of a little over 3 million barrels per day. There are different estimates out there in the industry, but most of the mainstream estimates suggest that if you wanted to get production back to about 2 million barrels per day, that would require an investment of somewhere between $100 and $250 billion spread out over a number of years. The country is also short of both the needed equipment to do all this renovation and skilled labor. A lot of the engineers and other people that would be needed to bring these oil fields and oil processing units back into full operation have fled the country. So there's a big shortage of labor there. Venezuela's crude reserves, meanwhile, are among the largest in the world. They're estimated somewhere between 300 and 500 billion barrels. Most of that is the difference between 300 billion is the economically feasible recovery. That's basically what it would be worthwhile to recover. 500 billion is what, they could recover at any price. So that makes it, among some estimates, the largest reserves in the world, dwarfing Saudi Arabia by some estimates. So there is a lot of oil in Venezuela, but there's a lot of difficulties currently in obtaining it and processing it. And they're also facing problems as well because of its very heavy, very sour nature. It is trading at a discount in the market. It's also very energy intensive to recover. So with the world kind of trying to move towards a lower carbon economy, there's a couple of European oil majors, for instance, that have pulled out of their stakes in the Venezuelan oil industry precisely for that reason. So a lot of challenges ahead for Venezuela to try to get that oil production back to where it would need to be to help that country restore its budgets to what they were during the earlier part of this period. And Dr. Davis, I think you will explain how all this relates to Haiti.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Zach.
You're welcome.
Okay, so as Zach mentioned, during the early 2000s and 2010s, Venezuela was enjoying a peak oil production and peak oil prices. And he mentioned at one point something called the Petrochemical program. As many of you will probably remember, the Venezuela administration under Hugo Chavez, and then after 2013, his successor, Nicolas Maduro, their foreign policy was famously and openly hostile to the United States. And that one of the ways they use oil, their vast oil markets, as a means of curtailing American influence in Latin America and the Caribbean is through what Zach mentioned as oil diplomacy, that because they had vast amounts of oil and were raking in profits that they expected to be the norm going forward, they began to use these oil reserves as a way of gaining influence within the region and hopefully at the expense of the United States. And so this took the form of what was called the Petrochemical program. This was a program where 17 participant nations at its height were being loaned oil by Venezuela, Haiti being one of these participating nations. They were being loaned oil at a lower interest rate, and payment on 40% of all the oil that Venezuela provided them was deferred for up to 25 years. And this was by no means meant simply for the consumption of these nations, that they were allowed and even expected to when they got the amount of oil that they needed, that they could in turn sell oil to other countries and then use whatever profits they gained from the sale of Venezuelan oil to put towards infrastructure programs, healthcare, development, which came at a great time for Haiti because in 2010, in January of that year, a massive earthquake struck the capital of Port-au-Prince. It was one of the largest humanitarian disasters to date. And so Haiti was definitely in need of funds to rebuild. And between 2008 and 2016, around the same time that all these fluctuations in the market are occurring, Haiti received up to $4 billion as a result of the petrochemical program that they could put towards infrastructure development and healthcare. However, when Venezuela when the oil stopped flowing and the money stopped coming in, a lot of Haitians, both in the general public and political opposition, looked around and noticed that after years and $4 billion, that not a lot looked very different. Very little to nothing had been rebuilt. And so there was this question of, we got $4 billion, what happened to it? And the Haitian Senate put together a 5-person committee to investigate this. And in 2017, they determined that throughout the period of the program, the Haitian government's coffers had been misreported, exchange rates had been adjusted, and over half of the contracts issued by the Haitian government for construction and development and the like were given to contractors that had done so outside of any official billing process. So it became quite clear that a lot of the money had just simply been wasted and had been subject to cronyism, where Haitian politicians were giving the money to friends rather than people who were actually getting the job done. And that brings us to the fact that 2017 was also an important year because this was the year that Jovenel Moise rose to the presidency of Haiti. And when he took office, he had already, his involvement in the petrochemical scandal had already at least been implicated. To what extent, it's not clear, but he took office with at least the implication that he had been involved in one of the largest and most expensive corruption scandals in Haitian government history. And so, furthermore, if this wasn't enough to sort of contaminate his image in the minds of political opposition and the Haitian public, there was also an issue of a constitutional crisis, that he took office in 2017, but technically his term began in the previous year, but because of political instability at the time, he was not able to officially take office until 2017. And as we got to 2021 and his term limit, according to the Haitian Constitution, being a 5-year term limit, as he got closer to the end of his term, there was a difference of opinion. Moise believing that, well, technically I did not get to take office until nearly a year later, so according to me, I have at least one more year of my term. To which many political opposition figures and the Haitian public tended to disagree with him on that point. And to make matters worse, as people in the Haitian government continued to debate when his term limit ended, he increasingly ruled by decree. And it was a lot easier for him to do that after he dissolved 2/3 of the Haitian legislature. And so, on top of his potential involvement in the petrochemical scandal, him extending his term to an undetermined period of time, and ruling more and more decree and gutting Haitian checks and balances in the process, many Haitians were feeling that he was presenting himself to be more of a dictator and many had had their fill of such political figures from the Haitian past. And so all of this comes to a head on July 7th, 2021, where in quite dramatic fashion, Jovenel Moise is assassinated. In the middle of the night, armed gunmen break into his home, gun him down. His wife is injured and she recovers, but she is flown to Miami for medical treatment. And upon his death, it does not solve the problem at all. It only makes everything that he had done to that point to put the Haitian constitutional law into greater question. Because under Haitian law, if something is to happen to the president, the prime minister takes place, in this case, Ariel Henry. The problem is, in order for the prime minister to legally become the acting president, he has to be appointed by the Haitian legislature, which in the previous year, Moise had conveniently dissolved, all but dissolved. So at this point, there was no legislature to legally appoint Ariel Henry to acting presidency. Now, in the Haitian Constitution, there is a plan B in just such an emergency. The Chief Justice of the Haitian Supreme Court has the authority, in the absence of the legislature, to appoint the prime minister as acting president. But because nothing in this situation could possibly go right, the Chief Justice was unable to fulfill that duty, having died of COVID a week earlier. And just adding insult to injury, there's the question of Ariel Henry's status as prime minister, because up until roughly 2 days before the assassination, Moise had abruptly dismissed his current prime minister, replacing him with Ariel Henry, which the timing of it for many Haitians was a little suspicious. And as we say in American politics, the optics were bad. And that some have even gone so far as to suggest that he may have had some role in the assassination. It's still an ongoing investigation to determine who all the gunmen were working for, where they got their weapons training, that sort of thing. And it does not help the optics that when anyone in the Haitian justice system begins to investigate any possibility of Henry's involvement, he summarily dismisses them from their posts. So again, in American politics, we call this bad optics. Whatever his role may actually be, it just doesn't look good. Furthermore, he has continued his predecessor's approach to ruling by decree, and general elections that may have solved this issue were supposed to be held last November until Ariel Henry postponed them indefinitely. So now, as of February, he has appointed a high transition council that is to facilitate general elections sometime later in 2023. We will see how that pans out. But for the time being, for a lot of people, what this means is that they feel that Ariel Henry is an illegitimate ruler. Furthermore, with the Haitian government as it is practically gutted, the government just barely qualifies as functioning. Because of the Venezuelan issues, fuel stopped flowing, and this has led to both fuel and food shortages in Haiti. And as the government authority, even in its own capital, recedes, the vacuum is being filled by various gangs that are acting as local administrators. Now, gangs aren't anything new to Haiti, but we have seen since Moise's assassination exponential growth in the emergence of various gangs and gang activity. As of last October, it is estimated that there are over 200 gangs operating in Haiti. Prior to that, it was generally estimated that there's somewhere around 60 in the country. There are now over 200 operating throughout Haiti, with 95 of them operating in the capital of Port-au-Prince. 60% of the capital is now under gang control, who are able to, of these 95 gangs, are able to cut off the flow of fuel and food to people at will. And the government seems incapable of doing much of anything about it. And as I said, gangs are nothing new. In fact, they are an extension of Haitian politics, and it's a Haitian political tradition that extends all the way back into the 19th century, where various Haitian leaders, or would-be leaders, have gone to the mountainous regions in the north and basically hired a mercenary army to which they paid to march on the capital and seize power from a political rival, to which they would in turn pay the insurgents to go back into the mountains. Or if they did not pay the insurgents, they would find themselves on the receiving end of the next person who did agree to pay them, which did happen quite frequently. This sort of reached its peak between 1911 and 1915, where during a 4-year period, Haiti had 7 different presidential administrations, none of which left on their own terms. Each one was either removed from power or outright assassinated by the practice that I just mentioned, that somebody, a political rival, would raise an army and seize power either by coup or a political assassination. And these insurgents lived in the northern mountain region, and were often nicknamed cacos, which is an indigenous bird species. And it was sort of symbolic for their ability to move in and out of the mountainous forest terrain like birds, swiftly and quietly. And this had happened several times between 1911 and 1915, provoking the United States to militarily invade and subsequently militarily occupy Haiti from 1915 to 1934. The last person, Rosalvo Bobo, who had used cacos to overthrow the Guillaume Sam administration, found that when the United States grew tired of all the political instability and took control of the Haitian government, he was notably upset that the U.S. didn't recognize his claim to the new presidency. So he turned his guerrilla army on the Marines, which the Marines swiftly put down in what was known as the First Caco War. In more recent history, Haitian politicians don't go into the mountains anymore so much. They use gangs to their political advantage. They will supply gangs with money and weapons in order to carry out their political will. They'll do voter intimidation in voting districts of their political rivals. They'll put pressure to try to get people to vote a certain way. They'll have targeted killings, anything that will undermine a political rival towards their advantage. So Haitian politicians using gangs to their advantage to exert their political will is certainly nothing new. However, since Moise's assassination, the situation has changed dramatically. That the gangs are becoming less reliant on their political patrons. They are still acting on their behalf to some, but they are able to do so with far greater independence. And as the situation becomes more and more chaotic and the gangs become more and more powerful, who works for who is becoming more in question. And of course, with any factional violence, or be it gangs or insurgencies, there's always going to be somebody who rises to the top. And so at present, the current most powerful gang leader with a very memorable name is Jimmy Barbecue Cervizier. He is the leader of what is known as the G9 Gang Alliance. He was a former police officer who was dismissed prior to 2017 from the Haitian National Police Force, mostly because there were too many reports of him accepting money right before a gang attack that he failed to stop. So, but he found his way into the patronage of the Tete Calais Haitian political party, which happens to be Jovenel Moise's political party. And so he was believed to be acting on their behalf in some regard as now a gang leader. After Moise's assassination, he rises to the top, forming over the next couple of years the G9, which is right now the most powerful gang because it is not simply one gang. It is an alliance of starting out as 9 gangs, hence G9, but the formal name now is G9 en famille, which is Creole for G9 and family. I believe the alliance has grown to somewhere around a dozen members currently. And so that is how he has managed to rise to the top as a gang leader who sees himself as the real political authority in Port-au-Prince, and even has appointed himself to seek justice on behalf of his former patron, Jovenel Moise. Primary activities of the gang alliance include extortion, targeted killings, weapons trafficking, and intermediary services. This is how he made his bones, so to speak, to rise to the top, that he often was an intermediary between gangs, corrupt police officials, and Haitian government officials. So he knew how to play all the sides involved to assert his own dominance. His current rival at the time, at present, is a gang called GPEP, and consequently they are backed by oppositional political parties of Tête Calais party. So again, the dynamic between the gangs and Haitian politicians is changing, but it's still an ongoing relationship where the Haitian politics is a part of the gang rise and continuation. So Haiti, being a nation that was founded on independence from foreign domination, the French being the colonial rulers, that Haiti becoming the second republic after the United States to declare its independence from European power in the Western Hemisphere, is quite famous for foreign resistance. And this was a rallying cry during the US occupation, as I said, is quite famous for resisting foreign intervention. So in a very shocking move, the situation had devolved to the point where last October, Ariel Henry and what remains of the Haitian government has appealed to the international community to send foreign military intervention to bring the gangs under control. And so the questions this lead to, and I'm probably have been going on longer than I intended, but this will set up for any questions anyone has, is, so if intervention occurs, who is that going to be and what does that look like? The two that most people would normally assume would be the United States, being the largest, certainly the largest regional power, and the neighboring superpower would be the most likely contender. However, the United States has been reluctant to commit to any such action because we have a long history of militarily intervening in Haiti, and the results have been quite messy. As I mentioned, the occupation that began in 1915 and lasted until 1934, making it, while a forgotten military occupation to most Americans, only Afghanistan recently and just barely broke the record of the US's longest military occupation. And combined with that, some resentment towards nearly 20-year occupation, the US's support of the infamous Duvalier dictatorship during the Cold War, and the controversial implications of US involvement in both of the Aristide presidencies, both in support of him and then later in his removal, sharply divided Haitian society. Some were happy to see him remain, some wanted him to go, then some wished he'd stayed, and then others were happy to go for him to be removed by the US. So the US has a messy past, and so there's some reluctance by the US to get involved yet again. And then the other would be the UN, but the UN arguably has a much worse reputation in Haiti. Recent years, UN peacekeeping troops, along with being implicated in bringing cholera to Haiti, which the Haitian healthcare system was not prepared to endure, resulting in a cholera epidemic predating the COVID pandemic, costing many, many Haitian lives. But the widespread accusations of Haitian women being sexually assaulted by UN peacekeeping troops has left a very bitter taste for the UN among the Haitian population. So the question is, who intervenes and what does that look like? There are a lot of different forms that could take. And so that could be a full military intervention. Is it just supporting the local police force? And how legitimate is that going to look? And I feel like that is probably a good time to open the floor to any questions anyone has, as after all, this is supposed to be a discussion. So feel free to ask any questions.
Thank you, Chris and Zach. I just wanted to say thank you for giving your broad overview and the regional context for the changes that have gone on in Haiti and historical background. Now, as part of the historical roots of our time format, this is a chance for us to have a kind of wide-reaching discussion of these issues. So anyone, if you want to stop sharing your screen, maybe, so we can see everybody, or there.
Is that better?
Yep.
All right.
And we're looking for questions from the audience. I will start. Oh, I think that we have a question.
Yes.
Hey, Chris.
Hey, Dr. Tolbert.
I know nothing about this at all, but I'm just curious.
Hopefully you know a little more now.
I know so much more than I did when I logged in. I am just curious, let me unraise my hand here, about how you study Haiti from here. Because I'm sure there are challenges, and so the limitation, the kinds of sources that you have access to, and what you feel are some of the limitations of those for understanding what's going on.
So the limitations are myriad because you're limited in where you can get information from and how reliable it will be. Most of what you've, in following the current crisis there, most of it comes from different US media outlets, some British, but all of these, of course, have like an outsider's perspective of what's going on. There are some other sources I've followed. There's something called the Haitian Times. It's based in Miami, but it's run by people of the Haitian diaspora, which there is a large community operating in the US, particularly in places like Miami and New York, that are they are very much engaged in what's going on in Haiti. At the same time, they're going to have their own perspectives of that. And finally, there are some people I know that live in Port-au-Prince, some that are Haitian citizens, some I know as missionaries that are doing humanitarian aid work in there, and they sort of keep me often weekly up to dates from what they're seeing from the ground level. Those are the best sources I've been able to get a hold of. Yes, Mark.
Hi, Chris. Really enjoyed that, and I'm sorry I arrived late, so I missed the first presentation. But I think this question could include either of you. You know, Haiti, there's always from the global community's point of view, is kind of sense of despair and hopelessness of what can be done, how can, Haitians be helped, and especially with the government problems there, how do outsiders play a role in helping Haiti? And since Chris, you were just talking about contacts you have inside of Haiti, do we have a sense of what do Haitians want from the outside community? Who do they look to? And what would be a welcome kind of way of intervening?
Certainly. Yeah, that's a big question I've asked, tried to get an idea. It's like, here's what the media's out, for Western media says, like, what, trying to get a sense of what do Haitians want out of this? And like you said, unfortunately, when Haiti ever makes it in the news, it's never for something positive. It is almost always a natural disaster or a political one. And if it shows up at all, and usually it has to be something pretty spectacular, and it has been since 2021 with the assassination. It only has enough to where, even though it's competing with stories like the war in Ukraine and anything happening with Taiwan that would normally dominate the headlines, what's happening in Haiti is unfortunately bad enough that it still manages to work its way into the headlines. Unfortunately, that just seems to be the case. In terms of what Haitians want, from what I've gathered, I haven't seen any kind of appeal for UN involvement. In terms of the United States, from the US side, I think the United States sees the problem and realizes it can't be left unattended. It can't just spiral out of control. It's just that it's been down this road before, trying to intervene in Haitian political instability and for 19 years putting down insurgencies, only to see and establishing order up until the point where American troops leave, and the problems begin almost immediately. With Haiti, it wasn't nearly as chaotic as it was before the occupation or even now, but there was a lot of, and it didn't descend directly into chaos the way Afghanistan did, but there was a scramble to try to figure out who exactly was in charge after the Haitian, the U.S. intervention in Haiti. And furthermore, with the post-World War II era and the Cold War beginning, all that the Haitian or the U.S. intervention in Haiti really succeeded in doing long-term was building an infrastructure where the Port-au-Prince could exert its central authority farther, which really only helped the dictatorship that rose under Duvalier in '57. As now, this isn't to say all U.S. military interventions for Haiti have not gone well or been really controversial. That in 2010 and in 2021, when Port-au-Prince was struck twice by massive earthquakes, unable to respond to the crisis on their own, they appealed, and the U.S. answered by sending military forces. I think to date, the 2010 military intervention is the largest humanitarian operation the U.S. Department of Defense has ever engaged in. It was very successful in terms of restabilizing, but as one U.S. general at the time quipped, that restabilizing and recovery are not the same thing. It's like rebuilding, and getting it back on a footing, and just stemming the crisis was something the U.S. military was able to do. But in terms of actually, rebuilding Haiti long term, they can only do so much. A lot, as we've seen in multiple military interventions, things have to work on the local level for them to progress past U.S. withdrawal. so those are in some ways considered success stories. And also the U.S. is reluctant to get involved because, as I said, Ariel Henry's legitimacy as the leader is in question, and much as it was during the Aristide years. And so the optics of the U.S. once again coming in to either support or remove a Haitian leader that half or more may feel should be there or shouldn't be there, once again looks like the U.S. is deciding for Haitians what their fate should be. That being said, from what I've heard from people on the ground there currently, the view is a lot like it was at the beginning of 1915, is that while they don't want to another U.S. military intervention per se, most of them see it as the least worst option, that they may not want a foreign military intervention, but they don't honestly see an alternative that will bring the gangs to heel and to restore order to the country unless some U.S. troops show up.
Any other questions for Chris and Zach? More participants. I have a comment and a question for Zach, I think, but it comes from the comment is that in the mid 20th century, the Chinese Nationalist Party, Chiang Kai-shek's party, used gangs a lot as muscle to get their side to prevail in political struggles they had with the communist movement. So gangs and arming, private armies is definitely not unique to any part of the world. I think the question I had, this came from a comment before the talk started, when we were talking about Russian flags flying in Haiti. And for Zach, I was wondering, is there any petro-diplomacy coming out of Russian involvement in filling in for the vacuum that's been formed by the collapse of Venezuelan petro-diplomacy that includes Haiti?
Yeah, there definitely is some Russian oil diplomacy that goes on. Again, they've got very large reserves of oil. And yeah, that is one of the levers they kind of have to make a play, especially among, there are a number of countries in Latin America, for instance, where there is a certain resentment towards the U.S. So as kind of a country kind of big enough to stand up to the U.S., Russia can kind of come in and act as a friendly force. There's also a lot of Venezuelan crude that does leave the country now, has to leave under a foreign flag, because Venezuela owes a lot of money to a lot of people. So a lot of times if say Venezuelan crude goes to a port and people know that it's Venezuelan crude, their bankers are just going to seize the ship and it won't leave anywhere. So a lot of Venezuelan crude that is leaving now is having to fly under a foreign flag, essentially. So they're working with countries like Russia and Iran that are kind of, know what it's like dealing with U.S. sanctions and things like that to deal with that. The only entity that right now that can really legally move Venezuelan crude is Chevron. They've got a play there. And recently the United States government decided to kind of give a waiver on sanctions enough for Chevron to come in and pick up Venezuelan crude and take it away. But, as I was talking earlier about the amount of investment that would be needed to, restore Venezuela's oil sector to health, Chevron can go in and, pick up Venezuelan crude and, pay for it, but they can't sink any infrastructure into it. They can't make any investments. So that problem continues.
And if I could follow up some of that, that as I was saying, the U.S. and the UN are historically the two options that Haiti would look to for something like this, but they're no longer necessarily the only options on the table. As I said, Russia, as of October, you start seeing an interesting change in Haitian protests, where Haitian protesters are waving Russian flags and carrying pictures of Vladimir Putin, which was, I found, a bit odd. And as Zach pointed out, that a lot of Haitians, not that they want to see Russian troops necessarily show up on their doorstep, but that Russia is seen as, in their eyes, as one of the only factions strong enough to seem like an opposition to people like the United States or the UN that they may already have like a negative view of. And so, I've seen examples where Russia is capitalizing on the historical relationship between Haiti and the United States as a means to exert greater influence there. And China has also demonstrated interest, and some Haitians view them as a potential contender against what they perceive as U.S. overreach. So, at this point, everybody's stopping short of referring to Haiti as a failed state. And while I'm not claiming it's necessarily gotten there, it's perilous. If it hasn't yet, it's perilously close. And it's hard to get Americans to really pay attention to issues in Haiti with everything going on. But it should, as one of the other potential possibilities of doing nothing, is that China and Russia are not ignorant to the fact of the potential benefit of the U.S. having a failed state on its virtually on its doorstep, particularly as the U.S. has direct and indirect involvement in places like Ukraine and Taiwan, that this presents opportunities for them to present a headache on our own doorstep. So this is at least one way where Haiti does matter to American strategic interests in the region.
Any other questions?
I did have one for Zach. That is the oil flow to Haiti at this point just completely non-existent? Like, does Venezuela have any sort of connections with them at all, or?
I mean, they would have to move it clandestinely, as I mentioned. The other issue, and I have not looked this up, but I would imagine that the answer is no. Unless Haiti has a refinery, the only thing they could do with crude oil would be to sell it to somebody else. So if you're buying it on the market and just trying to resell it, you're probably not, getting a difference. So that's part of the benefit of the PetroCaribe was you're getting Venezuelan oil either at a subsidy or with a long payment term. So effectively, you could take that oil, resell it, and get the cash. But otherwise, if you want to turn crude oil into gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, and so forth, you would need to have refining capacity.
Right, and from what I do know, by and large, what Haitians use is diesel.
Mm-hmm.
So. Well, thank you.
Like, as far as I know, there's not a refinery in Haiti.
Yeah, I don't think so. Any other questions?
Well, I'd say you've raised a big issue that is always a matter of a blind spot if things that are closest at hand and really truly are matters of kind of a long-standing historical relationship. As you said, that the two states that emerge from that shake off European colonial domination should have a stronger relationship with each other in a supportive manner, and we can see that the Caribbean is certainly not it hasn't played out that way, and if this is really a matter of having a failed state or close to an ailing state, that's almost an inverse of what Taiwan's relationship is with mainland China, that eventually is going to be a major strategic issue that the U.S. will see, but it will be too late for the Haitian people because that is not taking into account the welfare, the humanitarian side of this crisis. That's what I'm thinking about. There's a long historical relationship and humanitarian catastrophe, but we're looking at it as a strategic matter of our frontier, I guess, in some way.
Yeah, and there's definitely the strategic aspect, but as you pointed out, that at the end of the day, what really matters is that the Haitian people are suffering during this, and delaying as the situation only gets worse does them no favors. But at the same time, if intervention comes, it needs to be done in a way that's been far smarter, and looking at the history of previous interventions and understands what is actually going to help and what does not. And there, like I've said, the US and Haiti have a very long, complicated relationship, and that is its own presentation. Like that's way too much to go into here, regrettably, but sometimes it has been supportive, sometimes it's been not supportive, and sometimes it is the road to hell being paved with good intentions. So it's any action, inaction isn't really a good idea, at least in my mind, but any action needs to be very carefully considered in a way that actually benefits Haitians.
Well, we have a couple of minutes. Does anyone, some last words or any other questions that anyone's thought of it? Zach, what would you, going forward, what are the concerns in the region from your perspective, from analysts who are looking at from your perspective?
Well, as I mentioned, there is a refinery at on one of the U.S. Virgin Islands, I believe, that's recently kind of shutting down. Essentially, it's been denied basically a loan to replenish itself. Other than that, I think there's one in Trinidad and Tobago. So the region as a whole does not have much. It has a lot of oil. It does not have a lot of oil refining capacity. And a lot of the oil producing countries are having issues. We've talked about Venezuela. We talk about Mexico, which is another state where there's a state-run oil major that basically has badly mismanaged that country's oil reserves, to the point that even though Mexico has a lot of oil, it is also now heavily dependent on its supplies of gasoline and diesel from the United States. And in a lot of cases, the various gangs and cartels in Mexico have figured out ways to tap into the pipelines that are running those products down into Mexico. So they're basically siphoning off gasoline and diesel and getting it for free. And there's the Mexican government is struggling to deal with that. There is also, like, Argentina, going further south, has got significant oil and gas reserves, but is struggling to attract the money necessary to exploit them properly. So it is a struggle for the region. And right now, Latin America and the Caribbean's, in spite of its large reserves for oil and gas, it is pretty dependent on imports for pretty much all of its fuels and petrochemicals. And there's not much prospect of that turning around anytime soon.
Time for me to,
Hopeful scenario.
so time for me to squeeze in one more question for Zach.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. So I was actually going to ask you about Guyana. From what I understand, very massive oil deposits have been discovered there, and that there's talk about them being the next big thing in oil markets in that area that rival that of Venezuela. That do you see this sort of disrupting the dynamic in the region?
They do have oil reserves there. And there's, they're auctioning off the rights to drill and get access to them currently. So, depending on how much they end up producing at the end of the day, it takes a couple of years between when you first start drilling for oil and the time you're really able to produce much of it. But a lot of the problems that I mentioned earlier are kind of the same way. It's one thing to have oil, it's another thing to have refining and chemical producing capacity. So there's it's kind of this old kind of resource curse that we talk about a lot, with the idea of the colonies provide raw materials and then the mother country sends back the finished goods. If your crude oil is being taken away to somewhere else that's then refining it and turning it into fuels and then sending it back to you, you get some benefit obviously from having the oil and selling it. but it's not the same level of benefit that you would get if you were, say, to build your own refining and chemical producing capacity so that you could maximize the value of those deposits.
So like sitting on a gold mine with no shovel.
Yeah, or basically no ability to like make jewelry or anything else with the gold.
Well, I think we have to stop it at this point, but I wanted to thank Zach and Chris for your presentation and kind of thought-provoking issue that you've brought up. If anyone is and I wanted to thank those who came for our audience and participated. Next year we'll try to start our season off a little bit earlier with the historical roots of our time with another series of talks, and I invite everyone to join us again in the fall semester. Thanks again, you guys.
Thanks, everybody.
You can stop recording, Chris, I guess, on the
Okay.